Comes a magic look. Here comes. Oh, the stream is on. This is my friend Maury Lee, and this is session 3 for him. And we've got some props, we've got some other things. So Maury, remember the camera when you're walking things around, all of that. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Very good.
All right. Let's see. Greek meaning. I'll just set this up first. Looking for number 3 here. End of part 2, questions break. Welcome to part 3. Got it. So this has been a wonderful experience, really. Yesterday, my roommate went to the hotel about 4:30, and Mike and I had to leave at that time, came back. And then so he was talking from 4 o'clock, and he came back at 10 o'clock at night, so that was 6 hours. And then when he came back, this is my car, by the way. When he came back, we started talking together, and then we talked from 10 to 11, from 11 to 12, from 12 to 1, and from 1 to 2. And then we sat together, and we both very reluctantly agreed, we better quit this, you know. But it was just so wonderful to be able to express myself and express our ideas honestly and authentically with another person who's like-minded, because it does a couple of things. It creates sympathy, but also it helps us to articulate our own thoughts when we speak to somebody else. We make sense of things in our own mind. So we've been studying, by myself for years, and then to actually be with somebody else is wonderful, because we make sense of our own mind by expressing ourselves to other people, putting our thoughts into words. And one of the things I'm very grateful in our conversation last night, Mike said to me, one of the things that preterism has done for me, he said, is to make God more real, to make religion more real, to make spirituality more real. And I thought that was a wonderful observation, because that's what it does. If you have a future view of things, then you kind of gaze off into the future, or into the newspaper, or into a magazine, or the latest prophecy of end time. But there's no direct engagement of the mind. It's just like a picture in your head. And it's no good trying to persuade somebody of something while they have a picture in their head. While they have a picture in their head, they'll open the Bible, they will see the picture. They won't see the words. They will see the picture. And so they need an alternative option for understanding the scripture, what they're looking at. And this is the reason for visual models. When I present it to somebody, I always try to present models so then they can see it. And it's very hard to say, well, we're talking about a 10th century temple, and there's a temple there, and there was clouds in the temple, and there's clouds there. Like, you see it. So you have this alternative. And what that does for the preterist is, well, for the person who has this viewpoint, this past viewpoint, what it does for you, it engages your mind, it engages your intellect, it engages facts and extends those facts. And those facts connect to themes. The themes are very, like the biblical themes, like the bride and the harvest, they're very imaginative and very grounded. So, and very cause-effect related. And so that extends the logic of our own minds more and more. And so I was talking to Mike in our beds last night, and I mentioned something, and he said, oh, that's really good. I like that idea. I just had about 5 thoughts at once. Then ding, 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 And so, but he was really excited. But that's what it can do, because God's mind, we enter into God's mind by entering into his train of thinking. If we forget our own mind, or just no mind of looking into the future, but look into the past, we find those logical connections which extend our own thinking. Now our mind is being used properly, and we have our own minds back in a way, your own mind. And that's the mind you take to every other activity that you do in life. And so this is like a self-improvement course in a way that's very formal, it's very rational, it's very logical, it's very factual, it's very historical, it's very imaginative. So it ties together all of those facets of the human mind, of the human psyche, by looking in the right direction. And we have been deprived of that, really. In the same way, in the only precedent for something like preterism is the Copernican revolution, where you have a revolution in people's thinking that take themselves out of the equation, so it's not about them, but now puts some other object in the middle. In Copernicus's case, he put the sun back in its natural context, and then all other observation followed from that. 1543, that happened with Copernicus's book. What happened after that is called the scientific age, where an old view that had stunted our imagination and deprived us of imagination and rationality and logic created the Dark Ages. That was taken away. The truth came in, and then everything in our age has followed from that. Scripture says we can do nothing against the truth, but only for the truth. But the truth is preferable to non-truth every time. And so this becomes so important because it's not just about us, but it's about the connection with God, the connection with thinking, the connection with cause and effect, the connection with facts, with history, and that is not just about us. We have airy thoughts and we bumble around, with these scatty thoughts all day, but this is concrete, it's substantial, it's grounded in reality. So I was very touched, I'm sure, as you all were, by Don's humility. He's not here, so I can talk about him. By his humility, genuine humility and real kindness, and modesty. But he is really an amazing person. His morning musings, he's just been there every time, every day. He does this every day. He keeps on doing it. He has this beautiful love of the truth and this passion for speaking the truth boldly to people and uncompromisingly to them. So he has a debate and says, I'm sorry, but your view, not correct. This is truth, because he has a love of the truth, If you don't have a love of the truth, you won't care for the truth. You care for yourself or something. But preterism also, that's not just a few benefits of it, but preterism, what it does also, it gives us this golden thing called meaning in our lives, And I know, I'm sure for Catherine, I'm looking right at Catherine now, hi Catherine, that has given her meaning in her life, and it's given her purpose, and it's given her a task and a passion, and that fulfillment that comes from doing something that is true, then it has enormous value. And this has enormous value for human beings, for the human race, because all those things I mentioned, that what it does for us as individuals, it can do for anybody. And all of that is through Jesus Christ. He came not just to save ourselves from sin, but he came to develop and condition our minds to become something greater than ourselves. And I know sometimes in some of the things I've studied, I think, boy, that's just amazing. How did I come up with that? And I'm thinking, it's not about me. This just logically follows. And this is the conclusion. And people say, oh, you're so clever. Well, no, if you just stand here and walk that way, you'll end up in the same place. So this is God's self-improvement program, you might say, in a simple way, for human beings. And it's not just about ethics, but it's about something more than that, and connecting us to a wider truth, to a wider logic, to a wider reason, so we can be elevated to understand the deep things of God. So, but I'm very grateful and thank you all for being here. But you're a great encouragement to me. And I've met some beautiful people here that are very inspiring. And I hope that we can keep in touch in the future and do something more in Australia here by ourselves. All right, let's kick off, shall we? We've been talking. One of the things I try to do is connect this not just to biblical text, but to connect it to wider truths, to rational truths, to logical truths, to categories of truths, to principles. And we can think in principles because they're big categories that organize the mind. And you can understand if you've got a category, well, this is this kind of category, this is a logical category, this is a mathematical category, etc. But the first century model, really, in prophecy, there's only three moving parts. Like in a car, you have spark, fuel, mechanical components, and they work together to drive the car. In prophecy, you have three moving parts. And you guys all know this by now. You must be sick of hearing it, really. The mnemonic is tender loving care, TLC, time, language, context. Time is about chronological elements. Language is about the meanings of words. And the context is about the setting, the background, where these things come from. And so this part here I'm going to talk about in the time left is the context of the temple prophecy applied to the book of Revelation. So we've talked about the temple, and I've got this little knot, and this was so much fun to make. So this is my old pillow. I kind of pulled it apart, got the dacron out, and here it is. Daniel was telling me he loved this model. But this, it makes something concrete that's in some reality. So this was the temple of King Solomon. And in 1 Kings chapter 8, it said, on the day of its opening, 960 BC, God came down in a cloud, filled the temple so that even the priests who served within the temple couldn't stand it. It's just all this cloud. I don't know what it must have felt. I don't think it was smoke. Like a cloud, misty cloud, but it had come down. That was the presence of God, just like in the wilderness. So in the first talk, again, we talked about the timing, that it was 1000 BC. In the second talk, we talked about the meanings of words when it says Jesus will come in clouds. What does that mean? But clouds always had to do with the presence of God. God dwells in clouds. So in the wilderness, God came down in a cloud. And then the children of Israel saw that. And they believed that Moses goes into the tent, the cloud comes down, Moses comes out, the cloud goes up. Moses goes, God said, yada, yada, yada. And they go, wow, it must be true, because they could see the evidence of the cloud. In this part here, I'm going to talk about the context of this in relation to the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation talks about a new temple. You can't understand like a temple in the sky that's invisible automatically. You must have some kind of basis for that. And this temple of King Solomon is the basis of the New Testament. And it's the basis or the natural context of it in so many ways. So I mentioned earlier on in the Copernican revolution, I'll keep on coming back to this because there's no other precedent or no other model for talking about these kinds of things. But the Copernican revolution, when he put the sun back in its natural context, when that brought all the planets under observation. And there's a wonderful book called by Thomas Kuhn called Planetary Astronomy. And in it, he explains the Copernican revolution and just how it changed things and how it actually operated intellectually to bring about this amazing modern age that we have, where we can talk to people thousands of miles in different countries instantly. Like, it's a wonder. It's some kind of minor miracle, really, that we can do that. Satellites flying around do all this for us. But we live in a wonderful age. So if the Copernican revolution did the two things, put things back in a natural context, and the other merit was brought things under observation. We could see the movements of the planets and determine from the speed of the planets the order of the planets. So the faster the planet went, okay, the less time for its orbit, the closer it was to the sun. So Mercury had the shortest orbit, shortest year, then Venus, then Earth, then Mars, the next one. After that, Jupiter, in 6 years, Saturn, 12 years, and Saturn, 24 years. So I thought, well, that must be a relation between the order of the planets and the time of their orbits. And that's what we came about. When we look at the temple here, okay, in the 1st century also, what we find is those same two mirrors are present in the 1st century. One, with this theory here, that it puts the temple back where it belongs, back from the 1st century, and it came from the 10th century. So when Jesus is looking at the temple, making his prophecy, this is going to be destroyed in this generation, he's talking about something that began 10 centuries before. So, and once we do that, we can see not only is it in its natural context, but now all the time factors make sense. All the time factors are consistent. So this is a unifying theory of end times. It explains all of the data at one point in time. I'll just put this down. Right, I'll just have a little look at these notes and see where we're going here, or where we're up to. So what we want to do now is explain this in the nature of the New Jerusalem. The significance of that becomes more significant when we think of what Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build a new temple. Jesus was convicted on the fact that he said, this man said he is guilty of the crime of saying he would destroy the temple. That's what he was guilty of. So this thing comes front and center in our consciousness because it's the object that he's talking. He's standing in front of the jolly thing, this 1,000-year-old temple. And then he says, this is going to be destroyed. And in 3 days, I will create a new one. So we're going to have a look at the book of Revelation and understand the relation of the context to the book of Revelation. So we talked about clouds. Clouds are very interesting. So I made this little flip chart here. So these are all the meanings of the use of the term clouds. So in the Bible, the use of the clouds, in Genesis 9:3, the clouds shall be a sign to you. And then in 1 Kings 18:24, Luke 12:54 talks about clouds are a sign of the times. And then meanings go on and on and on. Okay? So these are all the different meanings. I'm not tall enough actually. I should get Mike up. Mike, can you hold this on? The meaning of a word is the use of the word. In clouds, the use is a sign, change, the presence of God for good or evil, the presence of God in clouds. Temporality, as temporal as a cloud. The morning mist rises, the cloud comes up, the wind comes on, poof, and the cloud is gone in an instant. Height, as high, the clouds for height. For clothing, clothed in a cloud. Obscurity, the clouds darken or cover something. Where are we? Here we are. Protection or shade. The cloud gives us shades of the sun. Speed, as fast as a cloud. Confusion, God came down and scattered the Egyptians in a cloud. Innumerable, as many as the cloud. Baptized in a cloud when they crossed the Red Sea. God's glory cloud is the presence of God. The presence of God in glory, the Son of Man coming in clouds. And then it goes on and on and on. Seen in clouds like this, just go on to the old, there's too many. But you get the idea, right? that the meaning of a term is the use of the term. If you don't study with a concordance, I highly recommend that you study with a concordance, because when you go through the 360 occurrences of the word see, you come up with 14 different meanings. And from those 14 different meanings, there's one single principle that explains every one of those 360 occurrences. And that's the logical unity of the Bible. And with the concordance, you go through all those passages. When you're finished, you just know that you know that you know that you know it means this. It means exactly that. And that answer is definitive. It's definite. It's definitive. You know this is what it means. And there's no doubt that you know what it means. And that's the use of the word. Other words that people invent, if they're not in the Bible, then they're not part of God's plan or God's idea. So let's have a look at the use of this word clouds in Revelation. Just quickly, in Revelation 1:7, the Jerusalemites, those who pierced him, shall see him in clouds. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those that pierced him. Those that pierced him were in the first century. Therefore, those who were to see him were first century people. Therefore, Jesus would come, had to come in the first century to make sense out of that. God's presence in clouds in Revelation 14:14. Fallen is Babylon. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like a son of man, sitting on the cloud. And the earth was reaped. In clouds, another angel came out of the temple, crying to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap. The hour has come." And he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. The winepress was trodden outside the city. In Revelation 11:8, their dead bodies will lie in the streets of the great city where their Lord was crucified. Verse 12, a voice said, "Come up here," and then it went up to heaven in a cloud. So this is clouds applied to the context of the book of Revelation, which was in the context of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So now, well, are we sure about the context? Who was this Babylon? The titles in Revelation 11, 1 to 8. So the question first, which immoral city was titled Babylon? So it's a title, not just a geographical location. But it says that it was the holy city. And Sodom, it was called Sodom. It was titled the Great City. It was titled the Harlot. All this city was to be judged in clouds. So who was this city with these strange titles or strange properties? The answer is this. So in Revelation 11, 1 and 2, it says, "And the holy city will be trampled underfoot 42 months." The holy city. Now, how many holy cities are there in Scripture? Anybody know? One. Which holy city might that be?
New York.
Jerusalem, New York. That's right. No, Canberra, Inaugura. So, but the title holy city in Scripture is exclusively, it occurs 10 times, that term, holy city. Exclusively, it applies to Jerusalem. 8 times it refers to Jerusalem directly. Okay, and twice it refers to the New Jerusalem, holy city. This is the type here, and this is the antitype of the holy city. Jerusalem was titled the Great City. So where is the great city that was said to have God dwelling in them? It is now demolished to its foundations. And that was said by Eleazar at Masada. But it's found in Josephus' Wars. Jerusalem was the great city, the metropolis of the Jewish nation. Josephus wrote that. So this term great city is always related to Jerusalem, but mainly to a very large city. It's used of Nineveh. When Jonah went to Nineveh, okay, is this not great city, Nineveh, in which is 120,000 people. It was a great city by population. Jerusalem at the time of the Passover had 3 million people in it.
Yes.
Because the people flowed like rivers to the sea down into Jerusalem and filled Jerusalem like Mecca does, at Ramadan these times, or the pilgrimage. And so it was filled with 3 million people at the time, the entire nation. Next, the title. Which city is titled Sodom? Jerusalem. Isaiah 1:10, 3:9, Jeremiah 23:14, Lamentations 4:6, Ezekiel 16:46, Revelation 11:8. Always Jerusalem. So the titles of the harlot, some titles are exclusively and only Jerusalem and can be no other, like the holy city. And Jerusalem is titled by a harlot. 2 chapters, Ezekiel 16 and 23. If you want to demonstrate that the harlot, that the context of Revelation is about the destruction of Jerusalem, and Babylon is the harlot Jerusalem, just take them to Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 23. It's a no-brainer, 50 times, okay? And those passages that talk about that are Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 2, verse 15, 16, 17, 20, 22, 25, 26, 26, 28, 29, 30, 32, 33, verse 34, 35, 36, and etc. to 52. So it's just this, like 30 times Jerusalem is the harlot. And it says, and your daughters are harlots too, meaning that Jerusalem is the head city. The other cities are her daughter cities. And so Jerusalem is the mother of the harlot cities that had also apostatized. Jerusalem is the head city. But because it had been corrupted, it had corrupted all the minor cities also. So Isaiah 1 says, the head is sick, the whole body is corrupted, meaning Jerusalem was the head, because it was the head city of the entire nation. So if you go to Ezekiel chapter 23, you'll find harlot and references to the harlot, abomination, all through that. Chapter 23, verse 3, verse 4, verse 7, verse 8, 11, 14, 18, 19, 27, 29. You get the idea. That everywhere it refers to that. The preponderance of evidence is that Jerusalem is the harlot. And all these titles together convince you or compel you to the conclusion that the harlot of Jerusalem must be, the Babylon harlot must be Jerusalem. Right, next one. The 10th century Jerusalem was the gates of Hades, to use Jesus' term. The law and the covenant and the prophet are all semantically or logically, those terms, created to Hades. Hades has opened her mouth in Isaiah 5:14. Hades has opened her mouth, Jerusalem shall descend into it. Jerusalem has made a covenant with death and Hades in Isaiah 28:14 and 15. Jesus mentioned it in passing. He said the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. But we know all the Jerusalemites, when Pilate called, what shall I do with the king, your king? They said, take him out and crucify him. We'll take Barabbas. Thank you very much. And so they took the worst man for the best man, which is a kind of our salvation also. He takes the worst in us and replaces it with the best in us and gives us the fruit of the Spirit to replace the old enmity that we had. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, understanding, all those beautiful qualities of the human spirit. But the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. But they prevailed over Jesus, but they didn't prevail over death. God raised Jesus from the dead to live eternally in heaven. And semantically, the law and the prophets are connected to Hades in Luke chapter 16. You'll know about that. Abraham's bosom is really the top part of Hades, the comfort area. And it says the bad guy, the rich man, dives, they called him. But it says can you send somebody back to tell my brothers, don't come to this place? You know, after death, it's too late. It's too late when you die to repent. But while we have life, we have the opportunity to repent and be intent on different change. But in there, Abraham says his reply to these guys was, they have the law and the prophets. Where was the law? In the ark. Where was the ark? In the temple. So the ark was the law was in the covenant box. Covenant box and the law were in the temple themselves. So this is not just a building, it's an institution. So it was the institution that gave life, light, and spirit to the entire nation, and protection, because it gave those principles that protect people, those innocent principles. Thy law is light unto my life and light unto my feet, David says. So all these things were in the institution of the temple. So when people dismiss, oh, it's just the destruction of the city. No, you don't understand. It's the apocalypse of a civilization. Why? Because the major institution that centralized all of the components of the nation were located in this thing. When this is wiped away by the hand of God, 70 AD, in that eye blink of time, what had lasted, an institution that had lasted since Abraham, over 2,000 years, gone. 1,260 days, bing, all over, Red Rover. And there was nothing left, because they had rejected the promises of God, and the two-edged sword came upon them, because it's not just a blessing, but it's a cursing if you don't follow it. So the gates of Jerusalem was the gates of Hades. It says in Matthew chapter 11, Capernaum shall be cast into Hades. I have the keys of death and Hades in Revelation 1:18. Death and Hades follows. So death is like a vacuum cleaner. Hades is like the bag in the vacuum cleaner where all the rubbish ends up, or all the dead people end up. And so this rubbish bag is saved up, and it's ready to be judged. In Revelation chapter 20, at the end of the lifetime or the use-by date of the temple was 1,000 years, and then Hades was judged under its terms. Why? Because the law, sin and death and Hades were located in and with the institution of the temple. And then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. First century prophecy, we know, we're just trying to identify who is the harlot. Babylon was judged in clouds. It says in Revelation 16, and the great city was split in 3 parts, and Babylon the Great was remembered before God. In AD 70, Jerusalem was judged in clouds. It was split into 3 parts. Exactly like Babylon, it's a reflection. Josephus writes, and now there were 3 factions in the city, Eleazar and the Zealots. They kept the sacred first fruits in the temple. So the Zealots went in, took over the temple, and they had all the first fruits and all the food and all the treasures were in there. So they just commandeered them. They robbed the temple in a way, or invaded it. So the Zealots, who were very zealous, entered into the temple. Those of John plundered the palace, and Simon had his provisions from the upper city. So these 3 groups divided the city. They had catapults shooting over the temple and into the city and into the palace, and there was a civil war going on. And Jesus said it was fulfilled. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, the Romans built a wall in AD 70 when they came. They noticed that people, over the 1,000 years of Jerusalem's existence, the walls had become porous. So if people wanted to leave the city, well, they dug a little tunnel. They could just take their little tunnel, go under the wall and go out. So when the Romans came to invade, they found that all these people had come out of their little hidey holes under the city that they'd been building for 1,000 years and attacked the Romans from behind. So Titus said, right, what we're going to do is build a wall around the wall. And so they built a wall about 10 feet high, and they had sentry posts. They built it in 3 days. 60,000 men working like beavers. They just put their swords and their shields and their spears down, and they built like beavers. And then Josephus writes that there was just this deadly silence that pervaded the entire city, because they'd had the catapults going, they had the Romans and people fighting, and now nothing. There's no sound. So inside Jerusalem, they're looking out, they're saying, what are they doing out there? What are they doing? They're building a wall. Why are they building a wall? Why aren't they attacking us? They were attacking us yesterday with shouting and catapults. There's nothing. So there was this deadly silence, Josephus says, that filled the whole city, and fear pervaded the minds of every person in the city. And then after they built the wall, when the people Jerusalemites came out and tried to escape, they would be captured. The Romans told them, if you escape, we're going to crucify you. Just like you crucified Jerusalem, you Jerusalemites. Do you know how many people were crucified? 500 people were crucified every day. Every day in this horrible destruction, this result of sin. The wages of sin is death. This is the kind of reality that death looks like. It says, Josephus says that they ran out of trees to make crosses to crucify these people from. And so, but 500 people every day that tried to escape the city to look for food because there was a famine in the city, 500 people every day were crucified. Can you imagine that? 2 days, 1,000, 3 days, 1,500, 4 days, 2,000 people. Like 7 5s are 35, 3,500 people every week. And there was just all these crucifixes all around. Shades of Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. We crucified Jesus. This is your wage. This is what you have earned. The wages of sin is death. You don't love the truth. You don't love God and goodness. Here are your crucifix. You crucify yourself. So the abomination in the holy place in Matthew 24, this is how history fulfills the prophecy of Revelation and Jesus' prophecy of end times in Matthew 24. It says that in Matthew 24, that when you understand Daniel, understand what you read, that when you see the abomination of desolation in the holy place. So in AD 70, the Romans had chased the Jews back out of the city. The Jews just didn't have enough people or the expertise in military killing to defeat the Romans. The Romans came, and then into the temple proper, the Jews were chased out. The holy sacrifice, the daily sacrifice, had ceased by this time. And then Titus, with his soldiers, legionnaires, came into the temple, and then all their ensigns with all the different shapes on them, the 4 shapes, they laid them against the east gate, which is the resurrection gate. The resurrection comes from the east. Laid them against the east gate, and then all the soldiers worshipped in the temple. They worshipped their gods, and they made Titus the emperor of the world in the temple at that time. This fulfilled Matthew 24. Wars chapter 6, book 6, chapter 6, verse 1. The daily sacrifice I mentioned in Daniel 12, at the end, the time of the end, the daily sacrifice will end. This is the context of our end times now. And Josephus writes, on the 17th day, the daily sacrifice ended or failed for want of men to offer it. And that was the first time it ever failed since the construction of the temple, or even before the construction of the institution of the tabernacle. There'd always been a daily sacrifice, but now in AD 70, the last sacrifice ended, and it has never been continued again. And there can never be another daily sacrifice to God. Matthew 24, no stone left upon another. Caesar now ordered his soldiers to demolish the entire temple and city, and its walls laid even to the ground and then dug up to its foundations. Exactly what Jesus said, fulfilled in the same terms in the first century. Revelation 9:7, it says the locusts had golden crowns upon their head. In prophetic terminology, locusts are armies. They go through the land, they demolish everything in the land and just ravage the land and leave nothing behind, like locusts. That's an army. They go through, had golden crowns upon their head. It says Titus also put crowns of gold and golden ornaments around the necks of his bravest soldiers in the battle. So fulfillment of the historical record with prophecy. Wikipedia says that the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD was the decisive event, thank you, of the First Jewish War. The Roman army, led by the future Emperor Titus, besieged and conquered the city of Jerusalem, which had been occupied by its Jewish defenders in 66. The siege ended in the sacking of the city, the destruction of this fabulous second temple. The destruction of both temples is still mourned today by Jews on the same day, the 9th day of the month of Ab, which is a summer month. But on this day, in this year, they will mourn the destruction of the first temple and the second temple on the same. That's no coincidence. The Arch of Titus, if you go over to Rome, you can see the Arch of Titus, which that arch was financed with the gold from the temple that was destroyed. And it's modern day evidence that this is what happened in history. The Colosseum, $688 million, was completed in 79 AD from the gold that they robbed the temple of in 70 AD. So in summary, the clouds in Revelation, so in context, God's presence in clouds, comes in judgment in clouds, gives blessings in clouds, seen face to face in clouds, his glory is in clouds, the Son of Man comes in clouds, judgment, his presence in clouds, and he judged the harlot in clouds in the first century. So the reasoning is this: the uniform use of clouds across both testaments is the presence of God. And by Jesus' own testimony, his parousia, or his presence in clouds, in that generation was a judgment of God. And we can see in this event here that this is God, the invisible God, coming into life, into their lives, and we can see cause and effect in operation in history, in real life. They say the future is uncertain. We can know nothing about the future. The present is confusing because we don't understand the principles that are operating. But the past, we can only know things from history. So history tells us how God works. And this is a object lesson in the wages of sin. This is real stuff. So just in summarizing, thank you so much for your kind attention, and I feel very honored to be here and privileged to be able to share these things with you. The three lessons, the takeaway, I guess, they're all integrated. Time, TLC, what is it again? T is time, language, context. So every time you talk about prophecy, that's the order. Futurist people will probably talk about language. Oh, but the world hasn't been converted yet, or context, or Jesus is coming personally, physically, visibly. Language, sorry, not there. But you can always analyze what they're talking about and probably make sense. And the simple thing is, if you just point back to the temple, all of a sudden, that's what they have to deal with. So the temple is really the cognitive data, the real life worldly thing that they have to explain. And once you explain that, then you've got a little foot inside the door. Did you know about this 1,000-year-old temple? You know, 10th century temple? That's a little foot inside the door. Yeah, God came in clouds in that. And Jesus was standing right in front of it in the first century. He was 960 years old, about to disappear. And he made a prophecy 40 years later, it disappeared. How about that? And that's about as harmless as you can get, really. But it's compelling because that's it. And when they learn a little bit of history of the first century, you've given them a little line. They're facing now in the correct direction, and you've given them a little string to pull on, a little thread that they can tug on, and then they can tug on that themselves. The more you tug on it, the more it unravels until all things are fulfilled. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll grab that microphone from you off your body.
Yes.
And excellent. We'll end the stream. A couple of announcements.